On the 16th of September, 1992, a single man challenged one of the most powerful economies in the world. George Soros bet $10 billion against the British pound, facing the Bank of England in an epic battle. The result? In just 24 hours, he made a profit of $1 billion and entered history as the man who broke the Bank of England. But did he really break it? Or did he just speed up the inevitable? London, late 1980 seconds. In the elegant offices of the city, British bankers celebrated the United Kingdom's entry into the European monetary system. It was October 1990, and Margaret Thatcher, already politically weakened, had yielded to pressure. The pound was now trapped in a golden cage fixed at 2.95 German marks, allowed to fluctuate only between 2.77 and 3.13. But there was a problem. The British economy was in ruins. Double-digit inflation, sky-high interest rates, and a recession approaching like a storm on the horizon. And across the Atlantic, a Hungarian-American investor watched it all with the eyes of a predator. Meanwhile, in Frankfurt, the German Bundesbank made a decision that would change everything. The reunification of Germany had cost a fortune. Modernizing the former East Germany required massive resources. To contain inflation, the Germans dramatically raised their interest rates. It was a rational decision for Germany, but lethal for its European neighbors. And it was in this setting that George Soros noticed something the rulers seemed to ignore. The pound was living in a fantasy, and fantasies always end. But what he would do with that information would change the game forever. If you want to help me to keep doing these videos, please consider subscribing to the channel and hit the like button. It motivates and helps me keep bringing videos in this format. Spring 1992. In the Quantum Fund office in New York, George Soros analyzed piles of economic data. Born in Hungary and a Holocaust survivor, Soros had learned early how to identify when a system was about to collapse. And now, his instincts screamed alarm. The math was simple but brutal. The United Kingdom had entered the European exchange system at the worst possible time, with high inflation and a fragile economy. Keeping the pound artificially strong was like trying to hold water in your hands. Meanwhile, the Germans kept interest rates high to fund their reunification, draining capital from countries like the UK and Italy. Soros identified two crucial observations. First, the fixed exchange rate had become politically unsustainable. Second, the UK had entered the system at an absurdly high level. It was like buying a house at the peak of the housing market, wrong time, wrong price. But Soros wasn't alone. Other hedge funds began to smell the opportunity. Julian Robertson of Tiger Fund, Stanley Druckenmiller from Quantum itself, and dozens of other financial predators positioned themselves for the attack. It was like a pack of wolves circling a wounded prey. And so began the construction of the largest financial bet in history. But Soros knew that betting wouldn't be enough. He needed to create a self-fulfilling prophecy that would turn his belief into devastating reality. Summer 1992. While tourists walked the streets of London unsuspecting, George Soros was quietly orchestrating the largest speculative operation ever seen. It wasn't just a bet, it was a financial military campaign, planned with surgical precision. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Short sell massive amounts of British pounds while buying German marks and other strong currencies. It was like betting that a house of cards would collapse and then subtly blowing on it to speed up the process. Soros raised $10 billion, an astronomical sum for the time. But the strategy went beyond money. Soros used financial media to plant doubts about the pound's sustainability. Strategic interviews, calculated comments, selective leaks, every move designed to create psychological pressure on the markets. It was information warfare disguised as economic analysis. Across the English Channel, in Frankfurt, the Germans watched with growing concern. Helmut Schlesinger, president of the Bundesbank, had publicly hinted that some European currencies might need to be devalued. It was like throwing gasoline on an already lit fire. 16 de setembro de 1992, 6 a.m., London. In the trading rooms of the city, traders arrived for what would become the most dramatic day in British financial history. The screens flashed red. The pound was under attack, with unprecedented ferocity. George Soros had pulled the trigger. Billions of pounds were being dumped onto the market, forcing the currency downward with brutal intensity. It was like a financial tsunami sweeping everything in its path. Within minutes, the pound was dangerously close to the lower limit of its banned 2.77 marks. At the Bank of England, on Threadneedle Street, panic set in. Norman Lamont, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, authorized a desperate measure, raising the base interest rate from 10% to 12% in a single morning. It was like throwing a bucket of water on a forest fire, a dramatic gesture, but not enough to stop the disaster. But Soros didn't back down. On the contrary, he saw the rate hike as a sign of desperation. If the government was willing to devastate its own economy with 12% interest, it meant the situation was even worse than he had imagined. Then came the second hike, from 12% to 15%. Meanwhile, in Italy, the government announced the withdrawal of the lira from the European system. In Spain, the peseta was devalued. It was like dominoes falling in sequence. Soros's attack had triggered a chain reaction sweeping across Europe. And the worst was yet to come. Chapter 5: The Moment of Surrender. John Major, the British Prime Minister, faced the most humiliating decision of his political career. All day long, the Bank of England had burned through £27 billion of reserves in a losing battle. It was like trying to extinguish a fire with money. Norman Lamont emerged from the emergency meeting like a defeated general. Before the cameras, he announced the capitulation. The United Kingdom was leaving the European monetary system. The pound was free to plummet. Within hours, it devalued 15% against the German mark and 25% against the US dollar. Across the Atlantic, George Soros watched the numbers with calculated satisfaction. In a single day, he had earned about $1 billion more than the GDP of some small countries. But for him, it wasn't just about money. It was the validation of a theory. Free markets always defeat governments that try to distort economic reality. On the streets of London, the impact was immediate and devastating. Homeowners with indexed mortgages saw their payments skyrocket. Families who could barely pay their bills found themselves utterly unable to. It was as if a financial earthquake had struck millions of homes at once. The British press, known for its sharp humor, coined the term that would go down in history: Black Wednesday. Cartoonists drew Norman Lamont trying to plug a massive hole with pound notes, while a smiling George Soros watched from the sidelines. It was national humiliation turned into art. October 1992, 1 month after Black Wednesday. London awoke to a new reality. The pound floated freely, and something surprising was happening. The British economy was starting to show signs of life. It was as if the forced exit from the European system had freed a caged animal. With the devalued currency, British exports became competitive again. Factories that had been shutting down began receiving orders. Tourism boomed. London suddenly became a cheap destination for continental Europeans. It was ironic. Financial humiliation was turning into a competitive advantage. Gordon Brown, the future chancellor, watched these developments with growing interest. In 1997, when he took office, he implemented one of the most important reforms in British financial history, granting operational independence to the Bank of England and setting a 2.5% inflation target. It was like building stronger walls after the house had been invaded. But the social scars remained deep. An entire generation of Britons remembered the day their mortgages doubled in value. Families lost homes, dreams were destroyed, lives were turned upside down. The human cost of Soros's financial war was paid by people who didn't even know the battle was happening. Culturally, the episode fueled something already characteristically British: the ability to turn disasters into jokes. Comedy shows compared Soros to a modern pirate looting the crown's treasure. Artist Damien Hirst created installations with pound notes trapped in formaldehyde, symbolizing monetary volatility. It was art born from adversity. The dust had settled, but the lessons of Black Wednesday echoed through the corridors of power across Europe. What George Soros had proven was more than an economic theory, it was a new geopolitical reality. In the age of financial globalization, even empires could be broken by determined investors. The European monetary system never fully recovered. In 1993, exchange bands were widened to 15%, effectively removing any rigidity. It was a tacit admission that the dream of semi-fixed exchange rates was impossible in a world of instant capital flows. The lesson was clear: you either have a fully fixed exchange rate, as in a monetary union, or a fully flexible one. For the United Kingdom, the forced exit from the system turned out to be a blessing in disguise. When the euro crisis erupted in 2008 and later in 2010, the British watched from afar, protected by their floating currency. Countries like Greece, Portugal, and Spain suffered years of brutal austerity for being trapped in the euro. The UK could use expansive monetary policy. But there was another legacy, more subtle and profound. British euroscepticism had found its ultimate justification. If Europe couldn't even keep an exchange rate system working, how could it govern a political union? That distrust would grow like a seed over decades, until it blossomed into Brexit in 2016. More than 3 decades after Black Wednesday, economists still debate the true nature of that dramatic September. Did George Soros really break the Bank of England? Or did he merely accelerate a collapse that was mathematically inevitable? The answer is more complex than it seems. Soros didn't create the weaknesses of the British economy, the high inflation, the public deficit, the looming recession. He wasn't the one who forced the UK to join the exchange system at the worst possible moment, with an unrealistic parity. He wasn't the one who compelled Germany to drastically raise rates to fund its reunification. What Soros did was identify those contradictions with surgical precision and bet against them with massive resources. It was like a doctor diagnosing a terminal disease. He didn't cause the illness, but he had the courage to point it out. The difference is that, in this case, the diagnosis was highly profitable. The deepest lesson of Black Wednesday isn't about financial speculation, it's about the nature of economic reality. Governments can try to distort markets, print money, control prices, fix exchange rates, but economic mathematics, like gravity, is a relentless force. It can be ignored temporarily, never permanently.